Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our next Pulaski Talk podcast. It is my huge pleasure to welcome here today at the Kazimierz Pulaski Foundation a great friend of Poland, but also a great friend of our foundation, President Toomas Ilves, the former president of Estonia. Toomas, thank you very much for agreeing to do this podcast. Thank you very much for agreeing to visit us here at the foundation. Very quickly, I wanted to start our discussion.
I love the Pulaski Foundation, so that's why I'm here. I mean, it's like they don't have to thank me.
Thank you, and we love you, you know that. But starting our discussion today, very shortly, about the major challenges, geopolitical challenges of 2024. I wanted to ask you, having such a deep and comprehensive experience internationally, today when you look at the year that starts, what worries you most? What keeps you up
Everything.
at night?
This is the most difficult year I can think of since maybe 1991.
Why?
Because everything is blowing up. I mean, we have, or could blow up. I mean, we have an ongoing war in Ukraine for 2 years that does not look good. We have Gaza. We have Taiwan as a potential problem. We have the U.S. elections. Before we even get to the U.S. elections, we have Congress blocking funding for Ukraine, which could have disastrous consequences. And so you put all of that together, that's pretty much a recipe for a disaster for somewhere. I mean, statistically, we're not going to be, we won't be able to finesse all of them, I think. That's the problem. Mm-hmm. And so, and not to mention things such as sort of Serbia going somewhere, I don't know exactly. We see Fico and Slovakia joining the illiberal international with his recent comments about blocking Ukraine. I think we have we have big headaches, and of course with the U.S. election, I think the big fear is that even if Trump does not, he can't pull out of NATO immediately. Well, anyway, there's a year no matter what. But I mean, with some legislation in the U.S., it would be more difficult. But I think people are deluded because all that means, I mean, the fact that you can be in NATO and not do anything. Yeah. I mean, so all of those things, we face all of those things, not to mention the dithering on the part of the United States on assisting Ukraine, which then gives basically Germany permission to dither on Ukraine, and then we have the Secretary General position, and we have the European Parliament elections where it looks like the hard right is going to be doing much better. So I think this could be this has the potential of being a complete annus horribilis.
Absolutely. Professor Thomas Snyder says that this is going to be a make or break year for democracies.
I think he's right, yeah.
Either democracies will somehow find a way to reinvent itself and, most importantly, withhold the pressure of populism, of Trumpism, and so on, or we will have to witness a complete change of political systems, probably something that will be much more authoritarian, much less democratic. Do you, looking at what's happening in the United States and Europe and so on, do you have hope that we can actually withstand these pressures and with this year, as you say, truly critical for democracies?
Well, only if governments take a more active position. I mean, the kind of passivity.
What does that mean?
I mean, they have. Well, it means being more forceful. I mean, so looking at the Biden campaign so far, it's not really doing much. I mean, Schultz should really be out there pushing this. Okay, the people themselves went out in Germany this past weekend. I mean, 1.4 million people were protesting against AfD, but then we have the problem of parties like AfD, or we have Hungary, we have Slovakia, we have similar parties in almost every country in Europe, not to mention MAGAs in the U.S. that are fundamentally, well, if they're not anti-democratic, they're not really fully committed to not democracy is too vague a term, I think. Even sort of, rule of law, constitutionalism, respect for fundamental rights and freedoms. There is a strong theocratic element in a number of countries. White Christian nationalism is this kind of concept that is like growing in the United States. It's going to be a tough year, and it will require leadership of the kind that we have not had, because everyone has been basically playing a rather passive game and trying to push off responsibility. So the Germans say, we won't give Leopards or we won't give Tauruses to Ukraine unless the Americans give Abrams and ATACMS. And you go, well, I mean, where's the leadership? Someone's got to, everyone's too wimpy to do it. So
you've mentioned also a lot of the different, points of tensions, of conflict, of potential war. You spoke about Gaza, you spoke about Taiwan, and of course Ukraine, which is in a full-blown war now in Europe. And many claim that this is, this kind of speeding up of the unwinding of the international world order, which we have been seeing for quite some time, but it seems that the last few years, but especially the last year, have kind of accelerated these processes. Do you think we're on a trajectory that this cannot be stopped? And
no.
if it can't be stopped, what would have to happen?
Well, I think what we have to first of all do is recognize that, to quote Hegel, is the Minerva's owl. The flight of Minerva's owl only begins at dusk, by which he meant to say that we only begin to realize what era we have been in once it's beginning to end. And we have the era that we have been in since basically 89, 91 has been one of a very weak Russia, of huge economic growth, partially based on low interest loans. Basically 30 years of, and that era is over. Russia is no longer weak. It may be weakening with the war, but it is nonetheless it is not the pitiful junk heap that it was in the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s. We have a far, far stronger China that has not actually flexed its wings much, except in trade, but now it's beginning to push politically. So we had this era which we call the post-Cold War era. Timothy Garton Ash writes about this era, but now we're at the end of that era. What we're entering, I don't know what we're entering, but we're entering a new phase, and that's going to be low economic growth, high interest rates, an aggressive Russia pushing others around. It feels much more like 1947, 48 than it does anything in the last 35 years. It's kind of where 46, 47, 48, the people we now call the Allies were going, ooh, something's happening here. Suddenly you had here, Czechoslovakia at the time, Hungary, you had coups d'etat by the communists, and democratically elected governments were sort of, in the case of Czechoslovakia, literally thrown out the window. And it took a while for people to say, wait a minute, there's something happening here, because everyone's the war's over, now we're all allies, this is great. And you started getting these problems. You had, it wasn't only an arrogant and aggressive Russia under Stalin, but it was also after the war, immediately you started seeing huge tensions again coming between France and Germany, and I mean that's what led to Schumann, Monet,
coal and steel, absolutely,
right?
community.
So I mean, out of what we saw in 45 to like 48, you got NATO, and you got what was then the coal and steel community, which became the European community, which became the European Union. I mean, you had, and there was a huge activity. I mean, you had the Marshall Plan come in right at the same time when they also said, "Uh-oh, something's, this is not going right. We better do something." And so, I mean, in response, for example,
the feeling is, I mean, the today that, in 1946, 47, you had a huge, growing, vibrant American economy, a basically growing superpower to be.
Yeah.
And today, the problem is that the United States, especially in terms of domestic politics, is seeing the exact opposite, a complete dismantlement of, let's say, even a social pact that existed for decades and decades in the United States. And with the growing strength of China and Russia and Iran and many other countries that would want to topple this
right. And on top of that, no real leadership anywhere.
Exactly. I think the feeling is quite different than it was in 1947, although I do not remember that year very well.
I think a lot of people were nervous. I'd say East Europeans were very I think for good reason, because we saw what happened after that. I mean, the euphoria of the end of the war, I think, didn't last very long. It did not last very long here. I mean, and some people got out, others, and most people didn't.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you did have Ernst Bevin did say we need something, and wrote his letter to Truman, and Truman said, it looks like we need to do something. You had leadership. I do not see that right now. I do not see. I mean, you had, in Germany you had Konrad Adenauer, right? I mean, that's a whole different kind of situation from what we have today.
Absolutely.
So
we're definitely not, not as, we can't be, optimistic, but something will unfold. That is very clear.
Well,
let me let me ask you one last question, and let's go back to our region, to Central Europe, and especially your country, Estonia. We've just heard that Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania will be building fortifications on
bunkers,
600 bunkers, fortifications on the border with Russia, which very clearly indicates that you are preparing for the worst case scenario, which is Russia's potential victory or some kind of stalemate in Ukraine, and of course Russia testing NATO, especially if there is a change in the White House this fall, and testing NATO's resolve by attacking first and foremost Baltic states. What do you see? Do you believe that scenario is a viable scenario? More and more experts are talking about, Europe being at war with Russia.
I think they're repeating a cliche, but I mean, people even in Estonia are talking about that. I don't know. I mean, I think that Russia is pretty much depleted. I mean, it can do nasty stuff. You can always do and they do nasty stuff. They put up. There's a new sort of slogan in Moscow the slogan is like, Russia knows no borders. They already put up a big billboard right across from Estonia on the river. It had a picture of a big bear, and it says in Russian, Russia knows no borders. I mean, it's kind of intimidation. I mean, people fall for it. I think NATO, especially with the addition of Finland, and kind of basically, even though they don't have Article 5, Sweden is there. I mean, I think I'm not worried about it. I mean, I'd be a little worried if our Moldova, and they could do all kinds of other places that are unexpected. But the fact that we're even talking about this shows how things have changed, because the position's been all along. Well, come on, they're not going to do anything because they're Yeah, I just think back to the week before the 24th of February of 2022. The weekend before that day was the Munich Security Conference, and you could see clearly everyone from the Western countries, they would never do that.
Exactly.
It's like,
I was there as well
that's
that
completely
week.
ridiculous. That would be irrational. And we're going like, yeah, well, they're not rational. They're not. Obviously,
But not everybody. I mean, the Department of State was very clear on that. We were actually, asked whether we would evacuate a number of Ukrainian activists those 2 weeks before.
Yeah. Well, you had some good people who thought about
it. Americans
it.
were very serious about this scenario coming to life, including, an occupation of Kiev, which felt at that point like almost impossible.
Well, I mean, okay, you did have the U.S. intelligence community very much up on what was going on. But I just remember all the Germans, the French, the Belgians, and we're like, no, come on, he wouldn't do that,
So will Russians, do you see a scenario in which in the next 5 years Russians do enter a NATO country, one of the Baltic countries? Is that what you are preparing for?
Well, we just have to prepare anyway. That's just part of having a strong defense, and certainly the one result of the invasion of Ukraine has been countries like mine, which always took defense seriously. I mean, we've been doing 2% for, 13 years. But is to boost it up now to 3. Yeah. I mean, Poland's doing 4, right? So, countries are getting
serious.
This is what, when I said about my little Hegel quote, we're not going to get by on this peace dividend anymore. Having 1% defense spending is like, no. I would just say right now, and this is just at the end, that I find it incredible that the Quad has agreed upon Mark Rutte being the next Sec Gen, a man who has been prime minister for 10 years and has not gotten to 2%. And so the next Sec Gen is going to start lecturing countries that you have to get up to 2% when you haven't done it yourself. It's not a great commitment to
Absolutely.
NATO.
Although we're still hoping that maybe it will be a candidate from our region. Maybe it will be Prime Minister Kaja Kallas.
I did a calculation. This was no one is, Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary been in NATO for 25 years, and no one from the East. Then I did this calculation on the EU. So since the big enlargement of 2004, there have been 4 governments, as it were, 4 commissions, and 4 jobs, commission chairman, commission president, council president, high representative for foreign security, common foreign security policy.
And Secretary General of NATO.
No, I'm not. Leaving that out. And then 5th is the president of the European Parliament. So that's 4 terms, 4 positions. That's 16 positions. 1.5 positions have gone to anyone from among anyone in a population of 100 million. The population of the European Union is 448 million. The population of the new countries, the ones still called new, is 100 million, so more than 20%. And we have had, out of 16 possible positions, 1.5. We had Tusk for 5 years in one position, and then we had Buzek for 2.5. Yes.
Yeah. So definitely a huge underrepresentation of our region in the
absolutely,
and
so
present, because unfortunately we have to finish. We have a Chatham House discussion coming up next, but I wanted to thank you very much for coming and continuing to return to Poland and fostering this extremely important for us relationship with Estonia. We have so much to do together, and we share the same security environment. So thank you for all your effort.
Well, thank you. As I explain to my own compatriots when I say why Poland is so important to us, I go, there is only one large country in Europe that understands the term mass deportations. Sad, but that's the way it is. And when we talk about what happened to us, it's like to other large countries, they're like, yeah, okay. Yeah. But Poland gets it. And so
we share that tragic history. Let's hope it will not repeat itself here, as it is unfortunately repeating itself in Ukraine.
We won't let it.
We won't let it. We'll fight, just like the Ukrainians. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to us. And again, President, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.